Good morning. It is Sunday, July 6th, and this is a more detailed overview of Chapter 16 on persuasion. Understanding the differences between your informative speech and your persuasive speech are simple and at times a little complex, and I don't mean to be elusive or to be magical or anything. What I'm trying to say is many informative speeches by their very nature are persuasive. When you hear about a problem, you will be inclined to act on it. The persuasion speech is that next step. You have to inform people of the problem, and you have to bring them along to the point to where you want them to go, whether you want them to adopt a policy, not adopt a policy, understand the implications, or whatever your goal is in your specific purpose. Persuasion is, as described in Chapter 16, the process of creating, reinforcing, or changing people's beliefs or actions. The ability to speak and write persuasively, as you know, has been critical throughout your college career. You write term papers that are persuading people all the time, whether it's in literature, history, the sciences. The point is that we use persuasion all the time to get people to, one, understand the information we're trying to convey, and two, to believe and possibly act on our recommendations. The chapter talks about ethics of persuasion. It is difficult, and I'm speaking not just as an instructor. I'm speaking also as a consultant who works in politics and also as a citizen and an observer of society like you are. It is difficult to talk about ethics and persuasion when it seems to be such a lack of it in everything else that we choose to do. And the reason why I bring that up is that you do have ethical obligations when you persuade people. You have to have, the text talks about knowing what facts are and being honest with them, defining for people what the scope of a problem is, and giving them real solutions to what's necessary to persuade on a given problem. The psychology of persuasion. There's the challenge of persuasion speaking, which is multifaceted. Not only do you have the need for you to master information and develop it into a size small enough for the audience to sit through and for you to marshal your facts and arguments, but you also have to balance that, as we've talked about throughout the course, the views of an audience on a given topic. The significance of that is great, especially when you're dealing with controversial topics, or even sometimes more dangerously, a topic where you have to really bring the audience along through informing them of the scope of the problem, and then the added duty of explaining why your solution is superior to the others. Audiences who learn information and have to absorb a lot of information are naturally, reticent, naturally not interested in jumping to a conclusion or a solution. They want time to process. So you have a very important task at hand when you have to consider not just all the obvious factors involved with your proposal, but also what are the outcomes and impacts. For this speech that we're working on this week and next week, vehicle seizures, that is very important. You get to address one, whether getting cars off the road at all costs is good public policy. And then you get to also consider, what about the families that are affected by a breadwinner losing his car? If they're in a rural area, to have access to buses and other types of transit? What are the employment and insurance obligations? You get to put all those pieces together, which is why I selected one topic, gave you a vast amount of information out of the law, and then later this afternoon I'm actually going to get proposed legislation again on vehicle seizures in Washington State, legislation that was not passed, but also give you guidance on how to find the arguments from other people about why they thought that was a good or a bad idea. When we're going through 302, 303, 304, we all talk about how we process information. Degrees of persuasion, which you've seen actually in your survey returns, support, strongly support, strongly oppose. Target audiences, again, your target audience is 6 people, your 5 students and me. And so you've worked this audience now, this is the 4th time. So you know your audience, and you know their various skills and experiences from the speeches they've given and the feedback they've given you. Persuasive questions of fact. What is a question of fact? A question of fact about the truth or falseness of an assertion. If the assertion is vehicle seizure is the best and most effective tool for drunk driving, you get to prove that true or false. Analyzing questions of fact. Organizing speeches on questions of fact. That's on 306 and worth a look. Questions of value. A question of value is about the worth, rightness, morality, and so forth of an idea or an action. That's at 307. I am actually reading directly from the book on this one because as you're now preparing and outlining, I wanted to let you know that this is where my head was at when I gave the instructions out on this speech. Most of what I've given you on this assignment is probably a question of value or a question of policy. So you can analyze a question of value. You can then organize the speech, question of value on 308, and then questions of policy. A question about whether a specific course of action should or should not be taken. Vehicle seizure is the best example of that. You're given examples of to gain passive agreement, immediate action, need, plans, and all the elements that you'll find up to 313 and following. Problem call solution. You can also use policy questions are often handled in a problem cause solution order. The comparative advantages is another example. This is where you would actually look at vehicle seizure versus other methodologies. If, for example, you were opposed to vehicle seizure, you would set it up and compare it to other solutions and then see if the other solutions are as good or superior to the proposal. There's also discussion of Monroe's motivated sequence. It's an oldie but a goodie. It's been around. Keep in mind, I graduated from college in undergraduate in 1985. So I was in college in 1981. Okay, that is 33 years ago when dinosaurs ruled the earth. But my point is that Monroe's motivated sequence was 50 years old when I was in college. It is still referred to and is still one of the more basic tenets of persuasive speaking. So, sample speeches with commentary at 318 and following. And you should look at those. 17, the methods of persuasion. This is kind of the meat and potatoes part of the course. Functions of building credibility. Types of credibility, which we've talked about throughout the course of our class here. And how to enhance credibility. Explaining your competence. In this case, you may have said, well, I've looked at several different states' proposals and Washingtopia's laws, and through this analysis we've come to this conclusion. Explaining competence, creating common ground, and that can be created through an example in the introduction, a case study, something that everyone can understand. I point back to the NBC crime mystery show that you'll see on Saturday nights. Take As You Will, Mike Moran, speech instructor, walks into his house, blood scattered everywhere, and his family hacked to bits by a maniacal chainsaw-wielding cretin. Why is he in prison? I mean, the case example of how you bring the audience in and say, okay, we all understand what we're talking about. This is the lay of the land, and this is what we're going to talk about. Those are the best ways for establishing what you want to do. Now, delivering your speech obviously helps. We've talked about this. The one advantage of this class over other classes is that you get to re-record. If you don't like this, just take another 5 minutes and try again. Work on your pacing and everything else. Something else to remember, and I do this when I'm doing extended explanations. So if the screen goes out and it's still recording, I just keep working as if the entire view screen of the computer is the classroom audience, and so I just speak to the screen. Now, obviously, when you use a camera recorder on a desktop, you usually get a mirror image of yourself back at you. But if you can learn to ignore that and just focus on what you're presenting, it should be fine. How evidence works, a case study, tips for using evidence. Again, simplicity and directness. Ease of use, and also serious research. We talked about Wikipedia at the beginning of the class. Developing reasoning. Reasoning is a fancy word for argumentation. Specifically, we talk about from specific instances. Case studies are examples of those. Reasoning from principles. Causal reasoning. A causes B, therefore C. Analogical. An analog it's kind of like this versus that. They're kind of the same. Biscuits and muffins are kind of the same, although they're cooked differently. They're both shortbreads. I mean, that's a cooking example. Fallacies. They speak specifically of the hasty generalization. which is the general conclusion on the basis of insufficient evidence. I saw one guy drive straight through the traffic circle, ignoring the curves, therefore we should get rid of traffic circles. I don't like them either, but it's a hasty generalization. Anyhow, false causes. A false cause is known post hoc ergo hoc, which probably means after this, therefore because of this. In other words, the fact that one event occurs after another does not mean that the first is the cause of the second. You know, I make chili, my mother-in-law shows up. Those are not causally related. They may happen in sequence. Invalid analogies. An analogy where the two cases being compared are not essentially alike. The classic, this is an apples and oranges comparison. There's a reason why we went with something that simple. Here's a really good example in current events about apples and oranges. A lot of discussion happening about Iraq and ISIS and the entire collapse of the Iraqi civil government. People make comparisons to the collapse of South Vietnam in 1975. There's one common thread. The United States military and the government had heavily invested resources in war, and also the difficulty is that the United States stepped into Vietnam after France was defeated by North Vietnam. The United States stayed in South Vietnam through 1975, and then the collapse was precipitous thereafter. But there's often been questions about the United States' involvement in different places. The causes and effects of America's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan is far different than those that were involved with Vietnam. So when you make comparisons of history, one must keep in mind the factual elements of each historical example that you portray. We had a speech in our class about the relationship between China and Vietnam today. And many of us may have forgotten that China and Vietnam had a very violent and vicious, although short, war in 1979. People also forget that Asia, China, with a 4,000 plus year history, is not the only long-lasting culture in the region. Vietnam, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, all of these names of common countries come from an amalgam of 4 or 5 major dynastic powers in the times before Christ. So, for Americans to look at international examples, it helps to have your facts straight, because most of the time we have a narrow view based upon our own cultural history. While America was not seen as a colonial power, it held Cuba till 1898, it held the Philippines until 1946, it still holds the Marshall Islands and parts of Micronesia as territories, and Puerto Rico. All of these were acquired through treaty or military conquest. Red herrings, a fallacy that introduces an inadvertent issue to divert attention from the subject under discussion. Also, misdirection. If you don't think you can win on the facts, you'll often find people turn and try to change the subject, or they'll try to introduce outlandish possibilities. In the vehicle seizure case, if we don't adopt vehicle seizure, everyone will die of cancer. That's a good example of a red herring. Ad hominem, a fancy Latin name for throwing mud at people. Attacking the person rather than dealing with the subject. Either or is a fallacy that forces to have 2 alternatives when more exist. To seize or not to seize. The beauty of this topic that you have is that you don't have to say immediate seizure is the best idea. You can dispense with that and then come up with a solution of your own. I'm not forcing you to choose. I'm forcing you to analyze and persuade me on a specific policy option. Slippery slope. That this is going to lead to that, it's going to lead to that, it's going to lead to that. You find this in military arguments all the time about involvement in international affairs. Appealing to traditions, appealing to novelty. I've often wondered about, hey, we've never tried this before, let's try this. I swear at times when I've been in the hospital, they're not really being scientists, they're throwing spaghetti at a wall to see whatever works, that's how we get you out of here. And that's not fair, but sometimes we feel that we're being sold things for no good reason. Emotional appeals, fear, compassion, pride, anger, guilt, reverence, how to use them, ethics and emotional appeals, worth a read. And then we go through the rest of the chapter. So, your assignment is to create a public policy speech on vehicle seizure as a function of DUI law. I will give you some additional examples besides the statute and examples that you have before you. I've given you some speech examples from contemporary high school and college speakers to give you a feel of how people have dealt and presented on the topic. They are by no means recommended approaches. I really believe in giving you both good and bad examples so that you can say, it didn't work for me, or wow. So you have things to work with. In real life, we often are modifying what exists to make it work better. Not often enough do we get to create ideas from whole cloth. Hopefully you can find one in this example. I'll have more information for you later today, and then please, if there are any questions, check in. A final note. I am not certain how we are going to do classroom evaluations. I cannot emphasize enough for you to please, if you get a class evaluation, evaluate it. I'm also going to give you the contact for the administrative staff person that oversees me and the Extension campus. She's Melissa Rendon. Ms. Rendon is normally the person who comes to the class and gives out the class evaluations, and she's normally the person who actually interacts with students and asks how things are going, coordinating everything from textbooks to teachers. So I'm going to appeal to you to please take a moment, and even if you want, go ahead and fire up a YouTube video explaining what you loved and hated about the class, what needs to be in the class, what more do you need, what less do you need more lecturing. I kept the lecturing fairly limited, and I try to give you more concrete examples. If you've taken other online classes and there are techniques, strategies, things that work, this is a really good time for you to actually give them to the administration. Whether or not I did a good or bad job in this class is kind of irrelevant. What's really relevant is for the university to create a great online product. And for that, we need your input, because I'm not the only person that will be doing online classes for St. Martin University. It'll be happening nationally. This is a nationwide phenomenon now. We're going more and more online. So please, at the conclusion of your work, if you get the evaluation, please take a moment. Even better, if you would like, I will also give you Ms. Rendon's email and my next communication. And if you want to go ahead and sit down in front of the camera and just explain and send her the link privately, please do so. I want the school to work, and I want this product to work, and I will only get better if I have better feedback. I thank you again for your help. You've been a wonderful class, and I appreciate everything that you've done. So watch the inbox. More stuff will be coming, and good luck next week as you prepare for this speech. On a final note, I'll just show it to you, because I don't know if you guys have had to do this yet in your lives. There. I'm on jury duty next week, so I have to call in and make sure. So hopefully, I don't know. I have been called 5 times in my life since 21. I've been kicked out each time. And the story mostly has been I've been involved in politics. In a couple of cases, I had actually got the judges elected to office, so having me on the jury didn't look like good form. Other times, I knew the attorneys. My wife was the same way. We've either known the prosecutors or the attorneys because of the people we work with in our government relations and lobbying practice. Anyhow, I've had a blast doing this class. I hope you've had fun too, and you've learned stuff. So again, thank you very much for everything, and have a great summer. Take care.